inspired by what we've talked about so far. So it's interesting because, I can listen to somebody describe their practice, and nothing you guys described was wrong. Actually, I think it's a really important point to begin your practice. Of course, it's me saying this, but the second you wake up, definitely before you put one foot on the floor, you've already checked into one of your four directions, if not all four directions. But maybe really get used to the idea of looking at it as directions of attention, charging the directions, and you can alternate between the four, because at least if you have one, then you're doing it. And then if you have more than one, then you're really doing it. So, I do think that that's really valuable and super important and definitely worth discussion, but it kind of sounds like we already know, that the quality of the practice, I don't think it's directly proportional, but it will still be heavily influenced by how early you start it in the day, how you intend it. Some things I kind of avoid, Lisa, is creating a task for myself every single day, which is why I'll recycle note cards. I would have things posted around different objects of power, but I wouldn't necessarily seek to increase the things that I need to do, if that makes sense. I'll do that sometimes. Sometimes I'll write down something on a note card throughout the day or whatever. But it's kind of like the idea of, somebody on January 1st saying they're going to go to the gym every day this year. And they hadn't been going before, hadn't been exercising before. Now they're actually adding extra shit that they have to do in order to get the exercise, which is, get ready, go to the gym, do their gym stuff at the gym, and then do their exercise. And, they've created that extra step of going to the gym. And if you look at the statistics, how many people don't really go back in February, March, April for the rest of the year? They'll go at the beginning because they made that New Year's resolution, but then, they don't really go back for the whole year. So one of the things that it's not wrong. There's not too much in this practice that's wrong, other than, well, cherry picking is wrong. You don't want to cherry pick. If you know that you shouldn't be doing this in your practice, that it's not benefiting you, and you continue to do it, you will suffer. So it's not wrong, it's not right necessarily, but it will result in some sort of suffering in some way.
It's not wrong, but as soon as you feel the suffering, you go, "Ooh, not working."
Yeah. So, I mean, if we loosely want to use the word wrong, we can, because we don't want to suffer, right? So, we could loosely use that word, but I stay away from stuff like that. Otherwise, we end up with the 8 limbs of yoga. Because I'm doing that yoga training, and it's just like, ugh, like this is borderline religious ideology in here. Like, I don't, uh, proper sexual ... And it's like, who the fuck are you? Like, why? I am, and I think anybody should be really weary of a religion that has a leader that dictates the religion. Because who the hell is that? Like, who's this guy that's just like deciding everybody's spirituality? I don't know how to pronounce it, but there's this new religion that we saw on Lisa Lang. She has a really interesting journalistic show, and it's a religion that encourages, people of different cultures to marry, because they view the secret to peace on earth is through the interchanging of cultures and races and ethnicities and, all of that stuff. And I can't disagree with that. Then you go on their website and you look up what their views on homosexuality, and the leader of the religion during this year said, it's an affliction. There is something wrong with you. Uh, don't act on any of it. Just go ahead and be celibate. You'll be all right. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, who is this guy that gets to decide, you know, how other people should live their lives according to their religion? And that's so icky to me. No offense to anybody who follows a religion with a leader. Do
I
what
was just reading last night, about a statement that said you should not cherry pick when you're in a religion, you should not cherry pick. And I was always taught that as growing up as a Catholic, that you had to do all of it. You couldn't just pick out the bits that you liked. Where now I think it is absolutely so vitally important to pick out all the bits that you like out of any fucking religion in the world that suits you. If you want to sit on the ground, stand on your head, jump in the sea, do you know what I mean? I
Totally.
just think of it as a big smorgasbord of a buffet of delight, and you can pick whatever you want as long as you're not harming anybody or hurting anybody or doing yourself any damage. Then why not pick out the things that really resonated with you?
Yeah, and perhaps looking at what the similarities are and the what where the consistencies and anomalies are between them, and how that has served or destroyed, has that led to expansion or decay. And then it's certainly the things that you want to cherry pick from them become clearer. It's clearing it. Ida and I were just chatting about this morning. Sometimes striving for greater understanding is more resistance than it's worth. And often striving is just that in and of itself is more resistance than it's worth. So, um, intention and will have so much power, and then you recognize your own power, that the rest of it just unfolds, and you don't have to get sucked into any of it. You can try on idea. If you're doing that, then you can try on the ideas of certain things. Okay, you're taking this class and because you're embodying your practice, even while you're taking this class, you can see what feels icky and what doesn't feel icky. And you don't have to even make a judgment about it. You can just, continue to do your practice, which is point towards the things that are valuable and serve you, and point away from the things that don't. It's just all the same stuff, right? No matter the context.
Yeah, and also I'm finding that reading about religious things and practices, I do have a craving sometimes to get on my knees, but I know that that is from my past. My aunt that looked after us when my mother died, she wasn't a very nice woman, but she used to get us to kneel on the hard floor and say the rosary every night. 5 of us kneeling on this hard floor, saying the rosary every night. And to, I'm not saying, there's just something about kneeling that I quite like. And even if practices are sometimes a bit difficult, I kind of like that too. I don't know what it is about me, but I kind of like something that is a little bit difficult, because I think if you do that, I have a feeling that if you do the difficult things, your life is easier. If you put yourself in, I don't mean in danger now, I really don't mean that. And I wouldn't be sadist about sticking pins in myself or anything like that. But I do think that there is something to be had in doing the difficult tasks, even if they're tasks in your day that you really don't want to do, of getting them done first. And then the rest of your day is just a dream. The rest of your day is beautiful because you've used your intention and will and done the hard thing. Then the rest of it is easier, and you can enjoy the benefits of your earlier endeavors, if that makes sense.
I have two observations about that. One of
Yeah.
them is I had a very, very, very Catholic schooled, Catholic raised friend of mine. His name is John Higgins. It's okay. It's recorded, and he's Irish, obviously. And we went to college together, and he would go to the library and study his hardest on Fridays, because then happy hour felt that much better to go out. He felt like he deserved to go out and have some beers on Friday at happy hour. They tasted better and felt better because he studied so hard at the library. So I don't know about the Catholic school upbringing and that notion. You just reminded me of it. The other thing is, perhaps there's some element, maybe not, perhaps there's some element of, if it's difficult or it's more challenging, or whatever word you want to use, it helps you to focus. because it gets your attention. And so you focus better when it's more of a challenge. And it's probably not about it being hard that's valuable. It's probably the focus that's valuable. That's just I don't know, you can try that on next time you have that feeling and see if that's true.
Yes, but you don't want to go down the route of thinking that you're some kind of martyr, or you're better than somebody because you're doing a hard thing. That's the balance in it, is that you're doing it because you're getting something from it. But also, I'm very, very aware of not keeping score now, because that was my big downfall in the past, was writing everything down, ticking things off, accumulating like 100 days of something or whatever. And then there's nothing wrong with doing that. I don't feel there's anything wrong with doing that, but it's the falling down into a big black hole whenever you miss a day. That was my problem in the
It
past.
served you. If it
You,
served you and it
yeah.
was a tool that you used, then it was
But
fine. You
just
don't
the
have to
leaking
judge it.
power, if you feel, was my thing, that every single year, like Ernest spoke of, going to the gym and doing something, and I was so determined and so good at really pushing the boat out and doing the thing. But when I fell down, then I fell down spectacularly, and then went to the other extreme, from the virtue to the sin, with no balance in between. I would have just fell down there. But learning about leaking power and stuff has been such a blessing in my life. I think it's getting older too, like in your 60s, people used to say you don't care what other people think, but I really do believe that you begin to understand that nobody really, apart from the people who you live with and your family, who do care about you, but they only care about you in small bits. Really, you're on your own. I have learned that really and truly inside your spirit, you're on your own, even though we're supposed to be all joined. But that's the fear in life, is, for me, that you are on your own, and then there's no fear in it at the same time. There's no fear in it, because really, oh, I don't know, I'm going down one of those things. But yeah, I think really that as you get older, you realize that nobody is really thinking about you. Nobody is really, you could wear that pink hat and be outrageous, and somebody might look at you for 10 seconds and think, look at that strange woman, or you don't even know what they're thinking, and nobody really cares. And I think that is the real blessing as you get older, that you can totally be yourself and be okay with nobody caring, not wanting people to care, not interested in how they see you. And that's a blessing as you get older.
It's wisdom, I think, if you apply it. Some people never get to that, but I think the reason why that comes with age is because, like the other 2 points on the triangle, you have a lot more information, you have a lot more personal experience, you have the experience of others, and then and you have your own innate intelligence, and if you apply those things, just from the sheer fact of living on the planet for however many years, you know, if you apply those things, then you've got some wisdom there, and that's why people of certain age look back and go, I can't believe, if I could do it over, I wouldn't spend the time stressing over the small things that I stressed over, because they're not worth it. But it took some trial and error to recognize that.
Yep, there's a lot to unpack in all this. Let me add the note to that very last thing.
I was thinking of the triangle and the points of learning, while Ida was telling that little story.
Mhm. Yeah, I lost that last thought. Okay, so I'll start from the beginning. We were talking about waking up, doing your practice right away. I don't always recommend necessarily adding an extra task for you to do. So, Lisa was talking about writing it on her. When you do that, that's fine, but just kind of be conscientious about creating something for you to do that if you don't do, now everything is derailed. It's not completely necessary. So if you have for example, let's say you're running and you just don't have time today, grab an old note card, go to the tricks of attention that are your lowest hanging fruit. One of the things about what I hear, and it's probably the way that this practice was delivered to this group because it was evolutionary. It changed over time. I mean that by evolutionary, it changed over time. I don't mean that as how some people use the word. It evolved from what it was in the very beginning, which was really reflective of where I was with my practice in a way. So because that's really all I can deliver. Where'd you go, Shayna? She doesn't want to participate today. And I think so some of the things that I hear, it is really similar to some of the things that we talked about a lot in the beginning. But and so I can also listen interestingly to what I don't hear. There's a lot of things when I talk to somebody, I don't hear anything about it. And when we talk about our practice, there should be certain elements that are there if we're in these stages of practice. So one of the things that I'm doing, so bridge is something to unpack. There's a lot to the bridge mindfulness system. And I'll kind of show you here what I mean. What? Just trying to type in words here. And then I'll get specific and make some practice recommendations, of course. And Ida, you really touched on some things that would come up much later in the practice, and that's okay too. And we'll talk about some of that towards the end if we have time. And so I'm sure you know what's going to go in these 4 little slots, but I'll let Donna tell me what goes in these 4. Starting with the first one. You're muted.
How are you breaking it down? Where are we starting from?
This is the 4 layers of the bridge mindfulness system.
Oh, presence,
Nope.
the 4 layers.
Yes.
Oh, basic alignment, counterbalance.
Yes. And counterbalance is where we spend, actually, you'll be surprised. When you really see what I've put together with hydrostasy, you'll see that that is equal in proportion to counterbalance. I'm also adding to warrior training so that it's not quite so simplistic and it stands as, more of its own practice. Not really adding to counterbalance and basic alignment. There's very little I can add to that at this point. Hydrostasy is finished, although I haven't, delivered it formally, all of it formally. Now, the interesting thing is that these are highly conceptual. We end up talking a lot, right? Basic alignment, we talk about all kinds of things. Counterbalance, we talk about all kinds of things. Warrior training, we talk about all kinds of things. Hydrostasy, we'll talk about a few things. So there's a lot of conceptual chit chat in all of that. Does that make sense? And that's okay. We have to explain things. That's fine. What the system doesn't really have yet, and has been my focus for a little while, and it's coming together, and you know how things come together with me. It can be smooth and slow nowadays, as opposed to just trying to get shit done just to get it done. Because things are revealed to me over time. So a lot of times I don't know why I don't want to do it. I don't know why it feels weird. It just does. And then later it's revealed to me. I'm like, oh, that's why. Yeah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to participate in that type of thing. So one aspect that we don't talk much about right now will be deliverable techniques, things that are just techniques. There's not a lot of philosophy. Why are we that will be in, the structure of basic alignment and counterbalance. That'll be available for someone to learn. That's all cool. But what I'm also creating now are specific, deliberate, I'm telling you what to do type of practices. Now, you don't have to do them. You can go do whatever the hell you want, and I hope it works out well. If you're following principles, chances are it's going to be fine, and that's easy peasy. But one of the things that I will incorporate into this practice is Qigong. That's a formal practice. It can be, it can also be informal, and that's cool too. I will incorporate Tai Chi, physical Tai Chi, all of the energies of Tai Chi. These are things that we can do more formally as well. I will add Yin Yoga. There's a reason that, because I've done so much shit, like Donna, you know, I came to this group. I've tried so many things. I've done so many things. I've done courses, and I've tried practices, and I've done so much shit. And there's reasons why some stuff just doesn't resonate, and it fell by the wayside. It's just, I don't want to do that, you know. I like other types of yoga, but I think there's something really special about Yin Yoga that could be potentially missed with other things. And also I see with yoga nowadays, they're trying to turn it into exercise. And that's okay. If you want to use your yoga for exercise, that's all good. I don't. And again, I can only offer what I do and what I know. That's one of the things about being a teacher is, are you teaching what you know, or are you teaching what you do? Because if you do it, you know it. But if you know it and don't do it, why are you teaching me? Why do you want me to do something that you yourself don't even do? Like, what the hell is that about? Okay, so these four are the formal practices that I will be adding to the Bridge Mindfulness System. I would say, though, that we don't really get started in any of this until warrior training. And then especially in hydrostasy, and then especially when we start to get into what I call hunting power. Does this make sense so far? The real kicker will be the informal element to all this that will contain techniques. I'll be telling the person exactly what they should do according to this practice. And I've cross-referenced it with a variety of people just to make sure that the shit makes sense. And so E is mind intention. Just like in I Chuan, which is a type of Kung Fu, E leads Qi. The mind's intention, when combined with attention, moves the energy. This is Gong means practice. That's really all it means is, you know, you're doing your practice. So Qigong is an energy practice. Gong Fu is practice that leads to skill. Muscle activation, I'll put that in parentheses because that's what I will be calling. So for Ida, she's going to really like muscle activation because it's not easy. You can do it or not do it. I don't really care, but I will offer it, and it will lend to the Tai Chi, the Qigong, and the yoga. So it will all work really well together. But there will be aspects that won't be easy. Slow squats aren't easy. They're not necessarily fun. But when you look at your triangle and you see that the desire, there's slow squats are absolutely amazing for your body. The way it gets your blood flowing, the way that you engage your legs. You're doing so much with your legs all day. It just makes sense to strengthen them. So
Really good for your bones too.
really good for your bones. Absolutely. So slow squats, all kinds of different things that I'll offer when I'm ready. So the formal practices will take time to deliver. They'll take time to create a little bit more closely. I'm ready for Qigong. I feel really, really fine with Qigong. Tai Chi, I'm still tightening it up. So I'm still working on how I want to tighten it, how I want to deliver it, how I want it to look. So that'll still be a little bit of time. So I appreciate your patience, but Qigong is ready to go. It's breath coordinated with movement, but I'll also be able to cue the mind's attention with imagination to get the Qi activated and moving, which makes it Qigong. The biggest difference between the way that I deliver anything as opposed to the way other people deliver things is we're not trying to manipulate or control. So there's a lot of practitioners who want you to manipulate your Qi, and I don't do that. all we're going to do is place our attention in certain areas. It will go that way naturally, and it will just open up channels allowing energy to flow. We just want to create more flow, a balanced ebb and flow with our energy. Does that make sense so far? Shayna, may I have a final cup of coffee if you're available? Are you available? Well, she's in the bathroom, unavailable. Give me 1 second and then we'll talk about the element that I'd really like to start talking about. It's not 100% organized, but it could be relative to what Lisa was talking about at the beginning of class, and it will, or the beginning of the group study, and it can also lend to some of the more advanced topics that Ida was talking about. Be right back. Okay, so let's say Donna's brand new and she wants to know more about where this Gong practice comes from. Like, what is this? That's bridge mindfulness. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the different layers of bridge. Probably just start right at the very beginning and we'll talk about basic alignment. So she'll need to know what attention is. She'll need to know the difference between forms of cognition. What is intelligence? What is wisdom? What is knowledge? We can talk about those things. You're not doing the Gong practice though. You're not doing it just by accumulating information. You're doing the Gong practice when you're doing the practice, when you're doing what I tell you to do. Now, you will still be able to be creative and do your own thing, but I just think that there is some value in saying, okay, Ida, if you want to do this practice, I'm going to give you points of attention to do. And that kind of eliminates the burden of determining your own points of attention in advance because I've already done it for you, right? So it's still intended in advance because Ernest told you that this is what we're doing this week. Does that make sense? A lot like we did with warrior training. For some people, it was wildly beneficial, but for other people who weren't really doing the practice, it felt like work, and they didn't want to do it. And that's fine. I mean, it is what it is. So the Gong practice would start right at the very beginning. It's all the same stuff that we've ever talked about. However, one of the important factors in the very beginning of this practice, and so imagine Gong as, you know, we have this first, I'm probably going to call them stages because I don't like levels. We already have the word layers, but Gong practice will have a lot of stages as it goes through the entire practice, through hydrostasy. Does that make sense? Okay. When we talk about hydrostasy and we talk about the principles of balance, that's not the Gong practice. The Gong practice is telling you what to do with your mind throughout the day, your breath, your 4 directions, what imagination techniques are best that lend to this practice. In the very beginning, though, I really recommend, and this would be right at the beginning of the Gong practice when we're just starting, we're establishing presence in the Gong practice. That's where it begins because that's where bridge begins. So the Gong practice follows bridge, but it's techniques. It's just techniques. So when I deliver this, it will look a lot like I'm giving you techniques to do. Easy peasy. So Lisa, one of the techniques that I absolutely 100% recommend before we even get into the redirection technique, the rule of 3, not even talking about that yet. Verbally talk out your practice and what you're doing. Use your internal self-talk to say, I am sitting. Here is my do 20, which is the point at the top of my head. I will use acupuncture points because you can just Google that. Where's do 20? You see where it's at on the body. We've communicated. If I use the Chinese words and stuff like that, it can get a little bit confusing. If I just say top of your head, that can get a little bit confusing because where on my head? Like, what are you talking about? So, for example, if I'm saying that today we're going to pay attention to these particular points in our body, we're going to pay attention to the differentiation of shapes. And so what's really fun is I've been doing this for the past few days, going back to some of the very beginner techniques and doing them throughout the day, just so that I can accumulate my ideas into a deliverable format. It is wildly beneficial when, especially because we're talking about establishing presence. So you're still in the very beginning of the practice. You come back to the, remember I used to say name things around you? Very similar to that. We're going to say, all right, there's squares, there's rectangles, there's circles, there's cylinders, there's a square inside of a rectangle that's inside of a bigger rectangle that's inside of even a bigger square. And you are literally just talking out your practice. But the mind in the beginning is at 500 miles an hour. 99% of the population is thinking from the time that they wake up, from the time that they go to bed anyway. So what we're doing is we're seizing our voice of power, our internal self-talk. So it's not a voice of power yet, but we're seizing our internal self-talk and we're using it to help reinforce and guide the practice. Talk to yourself about your practice. That's fine. That's your mind isn't habitually used to talking about your practice, is it? You don't normally just think to yourself what you're doing in the moment. It's kind of like if you were an announcer. Imagine that there's an announcer doing a play-by-play of everything that you're doing, especially around your practice points. Which direction of attention are you engaging? I don't know. Do you know? Say it to yourself. I'm engaging the direction of the outside world using defocused vision, populating my bubble of perception. I see shadows. So even talking it out, maybe you didn't even intend to focus on shadows today. You can still talk it out. This is establishing presence. You can still talk it out. I see shadows. I see different, I was doing colors. I thought Ida would really like that. And Ida, I can't tell you how many times I come to a color and I don't know what the hell to call it. This is something that you would probably be better at. I'm looking at this green and then there's this other green and then there's this other green. And I'm like, well, how can I call them all green? Because they're all three are different. Like they're greenish. What should I call them? So I found that kind of fun. And then I told Shani yesterday, I'm like, I bet Ida already does something like that. And I bet that aspect of the practice would be highly enjoyable for her because then you get to really get into depth with the different colors. Of course, as we go along in this practice, what we're doing with our mind will also gain a little bit more depth as opposed to just, labeling the outside. Labeling is now labeling, judging, comparing, contrasting. Normally, when we talk about labeling, we're talking about an opinion. So, when you look at somebody, you're like, they're fucking short. Like, look at that. Like, why did you need to say that? Like that was you're passing a type of judgment. That's not what I mean.
Even the narration is not necessary. However, in the beginning, I know that we say a different kind of thinking to substitute the thinking. We're still thinking, but in the beginning, if we haven't yet identified ourselves as not our thoughts, you kind of have to work your way towards that. So talking out your practice is something that I did well into the practice. I kept modifying the judgment parts of it, the rabbit holes of it. It just got modified as time went on. Even just as recently, when I was walking on the beach and I said, "Why am I narrating this experience?" Like I noticed myself narrating. It was all beautiful stuff. It was all words that pointed toward the practice that I intended in advance, but I didn't need the narration. That was something that I recognized that I'm still doing on occasion. So in the beginning, for establishing presence, if we are just in the beginning of noticing that we are not our thoughts, and we're overloaded with an overwhelming amount of thoughts that fall below the level of recognition, then words are going to be part of it. It's just the way that it is. You can't skip that step.
Right. And then even with your example, I would still use my voice of power to remind me of why I don't need to narrate it. So because you were just narrating, that is words. It had gained a little bit of momentum. Best to use that momentum to be above the line of recognition. And that's what we're doing in the beginning of the practice that I'll be offering. And I'm gonna it'll be outlined. I haven't decided exactly the format yet, but it will tell you what points of attention to use. It will use a lot of defocused vision, things that I myself have done. Because I'm not going to talk about things that I don't do. That doesn't make any sense. Now, maybe one day down the road, you guys write your book or write out your practice and share it with people. And these are the points of attention that's great for being a nurse. These are points of attention that's great for being a painter. Lisa, you do sculpting and you do a variety of different things living in Spain. I don't, live there, so I don't know what you do and all that stuff, but you might be able to outline what it's like to navigate your environment.
Yes, I've been crocheting a lot for the holidays, gifts and things, and I there's a lot of sensory attention stuff with that. And I call it when I lose it, I used to put on the TV because the TV would help me focus. It was kind of like what Ida was talking about. Like if it's difficult, you focus better. And then I'm like, shut the television, it's distracting. You can point your focus of attention, but I call it the Tao of crocheting. It's like my practice while I'm crocheting. But I know what you're saying. It's just the application of it, no matter what you're doing. And if it's something that you do, like Ida's painting, like Lisa's Tai Chi, or beach walking, um, or dog walking, she has a lot of really mindful interaction with her pet. You can tell
Right.
by her reflections on it. So yeah, you can apply it to anything, and things that you are experienced at, good at, enjoy the most, it applies, and you could write a book on it, or a poem, or a song, or a painting.
Yep. So here's another thing. So that first thing is, talking out your practice. Talk out what you're doing. No matter where you're at in the practice, feel free to talk it out to yourself, because it is thought that is above the line of recognition. And as we go through this practice, eventually we will start to create space in the overall amount of thinking, but we're bringing it down by degrees until then. So from 500 to 400 to 300 to 200, and then all of a sudden, no thought is necessary for this moment. And I can just go into my 4 directions. If I have all 4 directions of attention, you're not thinking about a damn thing. I can assure you. It requires way too much attention to maintain those 4. You just don't have enough attention to have errant thoughts. And if you do, you see it. Like it's just so glaring that, well, this is coming in through my points of attention. You see it right at the very beginning, because
Ada just did that when she told us her story, right? She was talking about the example and of things being difficult, and maybe it came from my Catholic upbringing. And then as she spoke about it, she started talking about how it's a personal journey that we take alone, even with the attachments that we have and the people we love. It's still a personal experience. And then she said, and then she recognized, I'm going off on a tangent. I realized that I'm doing that with my words, and it's taking me, and it got me off the point. And she brought herself back. Like she actually just did exactly what you just described.
yep. Okay. All that makes sense. What was that?
Degrees. Everything is 2 degrees,
Yeah. For the most part, yeah. Okay, so does that all make sense? So we're talking about kind of the beginning of the practice, using self-talk to redirect back to the practice. That's not necessarily the rule of 3. That's just something that you can do to make sure that your thinking processes are above active recognition, so that we don't go all day and we realize towards the end of the day, shit, I didn't do anything. I didn't do a lick of practice all day. Now, also incorporate mantras and things that we say to ourselves. One of the things that I'll introduce very likely when we start to get a little bit more into the counterbalance phase of the Gong practice, I will tell a person to use their voice of power, use their voice for logic, reasoning, and deduction, not just positive thinking. Positive thinking can become wildly toxic when you don't feel good. So it's really easy to think positive when shit's not hitting the fan. You're just walking around, you're like, everything is beautiful, guys, just be positive, everything is great. And then as soon as something happens to you that's not good, you're like, fuck, I gotta think positive, even though I feel totally shitty. right? I feel absolutely fucking terrible because of something that happened in my life and I'm having a response to it, but I should be positive. I should be happy. I should be this. And that's not the power of positive thinking. That's when positive thinking can become a toxic trait because it's an effort of force. You don't feel that and you're just making it up. And that's kind of what we see a lot on the internet is, and it's not in alignment to what Abraham Hicks said with the law of attraction, because you're trying to align how you feel with what you're saying and what you're doing, and what you're saying should be invoking a feeling. That's really what she's telling you that you want to get to, is the feeling of things, not just, that's the meaning
And
of
yet
the words.
there was a fear in that, Ernest, when you were talking there. Sorry for interrupting you.
It's okay.
But it was important to get the point across. Um, whenever I used to do positive thinking before these classes, there was a fear attached to it because it was like almost like a replacement thing. Like I have to say this, I have to say this to stop the bad feeling that was happening inside my gut.
Yes.
To repeat something, to say something, to stop this because I don't want to think about the feeling that I've got inside my gut. And there was always a fear, almost a fear attached to the positive affirmation.
Mhm.
There wasn't a good feeling attached to it. So, I mean, how could it possibly um, calm you or fill you with what you were looking for? Like you say, you can't go from 500 mile an hour to zero just by talking, saying positive things. Now, I could see how it would help because the mantra of anything would help replace the fear, but it takes a while. It would have took me quite a while to go through positive affirmations in those days to get to any semblance of peace inside. There was always a fear connected to it.
Yeah. So some of this came about, like I realized this aspect of the practice because somebody was asking me questions. They were starting to go through something, and the bottom line is they're attempting to manipulate and use force and control. Your response to a situation is your response. It's already happened. It's already there. Do you feel sad? Do you feel angry? Do you feel this? Do you feel that? Fine. That was your reaction. That's what's occurred. What we don't want to do is exacerbate it with more thinking. That will be a rabbit hole. Now, the positive thinking, it's almost as if they're trying to change how they feel. So it's already changing. We don't need to manipulate it and control it. Now, what you're saying, Ida, is that because you're saying positive things to yourself, that's automatically above this line of active recognition. And that's true to an extent, but they're using it to try to change how we feel. They don't want to feel angry. They don't want to feel sad. They don't want to feel upset. So they think that they're supposed to modulate themselves to happiness, to joy, to everything is working out for me. Everything is fine. Although somebody's punching me in the face, everything is working out. No, it's not. It's not working out for you. You're saying things that you don't believe, that you don't feel, that you don't really resonate with. Now, you can use different positive thinking and it's still not necessarily going to yield the result that we're looking for in this practice. So that's why I use what I call the aspects of our own evolution of consciousness: music, humor, logic, deduction, reason, imagination. There's all these other characteristics that we could employ that are aspects of the evolution of our own cognition. So what I'm recommending is that oftentimes with our rule of three, oftentimes with some of the things that we say to ourselves when we have a reaction, use the voice of logic. For example, Ida, you were talking about the fear and that nobody is thinking, nobody cares. I really liked it when you said you don't know. You don't know who cares. You don't know who doesn't care. That's a fact, right? I could tell you I care, but you don't even really know if that's true. The only way that you would really be able to discern that is when words are in alignment to actions. That's typically a very good indication that that's something that that person believes or is willing to do. Typically, but even then we don't know because of the perception of the hawk. That's a principle that we work with. So rather than saying nobody cares or anything like that, because you don't know. When you say nobody cares, you don't know that. You don't know that that's true at all. That actually sounds a little bit morose. It sounds a little fatalistic. Somebody cares. I guarantee you, somebody cares. We care to a certain extent, right? So the logic, and this isn't necessarily a mantra, but this is what the voice of power can start to do. It was a little melodramatic, isn't it, Ida? Yeah. And that's kind of taking you from one extreme to another of before you wanted everybody to care, but now nobody cares. That's not necessarily, we don't know. The logical statement is that I don't know. So there's really no point in me putting any thought energy towards it. The voice of power becomes a very logical voice, and it's not good, it's not bad, it's not positive, it's not negative. It just is. It's logical. For example, logically, emotions will change. So if you have a reaction and something pisses you off, logically, that will change over time. So you can tell yourself that logic. I don't need to feed it. I don't need to fix it. I can just allow this emotion to run its course, to go through me, and it's absolutely fine. It will change, and I'll learn, and I'll grow. Those are all logical facts. If I remember, then I'll apply that unto wisdom. So does that make sense? I don't necessarily recommend positive thinking. What I am recommending, and this will be in this book, is to use a voice of logic. And if you need help with that, I can absolutely break down principles. For example, we're not looking to exist in an extreme. If you exist in an extreme, the system changes too rapidly, we can't adapt as well, and it will very likely equal suffering. So what we want to do is we want to go back to balance and let that balance gradually change in the direction that is beneficial for us. That's logic. It makes a lot of sense, especially when I break it down. And, eventually other people will be able to break it down for themselves. But one of the reasons that I'm so good at delivering this is because I tapped into the voice of logic. It will be a anthropomorphized person that I talk to in one of my books, because logic, reasoning, and deduction are a result of consciousness that has changed over time and is allowed to evolve. Intelligence was there from the beginning, from the very beginning, when we were a single-celled organism creeping on the sand, or I guess they didn't creep on the sand as single cells. They were likely in a soup of different amino acids or whatever. But so our single-celled organism, it probably didn't have a lot of logic, reason, deduction, imagination, but it was still intelligent. So we're always intelligent, and we can tap into that the more that we create space. Until that really occurs, though, we can use the voice of logic, the voice of reason, and the voice of deduction, rather than just trying to go to positive thinking, or kind of, Ida, and I don't know if you recognize it now because you use the word melodramatic, but saying that nobody cares. That's kind of going in opposite direction so that you can nullify the thoughts that you were thinking. It's like, I don't need to think these thoughts because nobody cares about me anyway. And that's kind of an opposite extreme, and that's not logical. You don't know who cares and who doesn't care. And if you said that it doesn't matter who cares and who doesn't care, then why would we automatically assume that nobody cares? Right? So that kind of voice sneaks in, and that's not logical. So what I will recommend, especially when we start to get into the counterbalance phase, your voice of power can be a logical voice, because pretty much everything we're doing in this practice has a form of logic attached to it. It is highly logical. Sometimes when we get into hydrostasy, that logic is difficult to explain because you got to feel it. But everything before that, well, we can talk about this all day. Comparing, contrasting, labeling, judging, thinking about yourself. When you think about yourself, it reinforces your own self-reflection. When you attach to your own self-reflection, you start to project that into the world, and now you're othering. Eventually, if this goes unchecked, it will lead to a place of self-pity, pity for other people, and then before you know it, you're leaking and draining all of your own vital energy, and then you use force, which also drains and uses some of your vital energy, and then before you know it, we're sick and dying. Maybe with
You
a lot of
see,
money, but
you wish that when you say nobody cares, it's a kind of a defense mechanism,
it is.
because really what you're saying is, I wish everybody cared.
Yeah.
But really, when you're saying nobody cares, and it's okay that nobody cares, really there's a tiny fear attached to that, that nobody cares. Really, that's just I think that's just the ego, really, isn't it?
It is.
Protecting itself. possibly
Yeah, we could look at it.
protection.
You could look at it as ego, but you really nailed, or excuse me, I don't want to say nailed it. That's violent. You really pinpointed. You really narrowed down one of the biggest things that will be one of the biggest aspects that is an enemy of knowledge. It's very difficult to learn from the present moment when what we're doing is being inspired by a fearful reaction and fearful response. Fear is an enemy of knowledge. And I'm not talking about fight or flight response because there's a tiger in the room. I'm talking about psychological fear, something that we create, something that we bring into our own psychology and our own microcosm. And it's not completely necessary, especially once you start to identify those things. But like somebody who just really wants somebody to love them, and that person's not giving them the energy they need. And they're like, you know what? Nobody loves me. I don't need love. I don't need anybody. They've just gone from one extreme to another. That's not logical. We do need each other sometimes. We can work together. We don't have to, everybody doesn't need to love me, but some people can. It's up to them. I don't care. Like it is what it is. But yeah,
This is
so
another one of those 2-degree things. So I know you're speaking to a group of people here who are practiced. So we're going from talking about the early stages of this practice and using logic, but then you're applying concepts of logic that are, I don't want to
because I'm
say
talking to you
advanced,
guys.
are
Yeah,
just well practiced. So
right.
it's still a very big jump. And part of the example you're talking about is nobody loves me. What happens in the beginning when you have a mind that has a lot of habit and momentum and overwhelmed with thoughts below the level of recognition is that you have a high degree of practiced emotional response to certain things. If you have anxiety, whatever, and somebody, whatever, you have this horrible feeling and you go, nobody cares. Nobody cares, because the level of discomfort, the level of fear, whatever you want to call it, that you're feeling is up here. And now you're trying to come up with reasons that match this high level of practiced habit and momentum feeling. So it feels way bigger than the person not holding the door open for you, or the husband who didn't put down the toilet seat, or they left their clothes on the floor again, and it's because nobody cares about me. I am always doing this stuff and nobody. So you have a lot of built up habit and momentum and feeling, and your feelings are way up here. And just recognizing that the clothes on the floor don't necessarily, the towel on the bed doesn't necessarily symbolize the level of care you have for your spouse and what they do for you. So that's the important thing to recognize, is where you're at. Okay, my level of response, because I used to have to deal with kids with anxiety all the time. So one part of your brain knows that you're not going to die. You're having an anxiety attack, but it feels like you're going to die. It feels like nobody cares. So you kind of have to accept this feeling. I have this feeling that nobody in the world cares about me. But I understand that that's probably not the truth. There's somebody in the world that cares about me. And then there are people around me who care about me to degrees. Maybe I would like it more or less. And perhaps I'm looking at, so you have to kind of talk yourself down from that place. You can't think about the logic of the universe when you're feeling that nobody cares about me. Do you know what I'm saying? Logic is definitely at play, but it has to be applicable to where you are at any given moment. And so you don't have to force yourself to feel differently, but you can use logic to talk yourself out of this extreme place that you are recognizing is an extreme based on the response is an extreme based on the stimulus that's actually that you've attached to it. So
Right.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
very hard to hear. It's very hard to be in a class and hear people who are well practiced talk about the logic of the universe when you're just feeling like nobody cares about me. Do you
Yeah.
know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. Yeah. And sometimes we have the tendency to look at the practice as this all encapsulating thing that will meet every human being where they're at, and it will never be that. However, I was talking to somebody who was not practiced. They have never done this. They don't know what we're talking about.
No, the
And
principles still apply. I'm just talking about
yeah, the
it's to
principles.
degrees that you know, you
Well, let me
have
give
to.
my example. And so I'm using a real world example because I talk to people all the time. You know, there's people constantly asking me for advice, and it's a mentoring opportunity. So I have a lot of experience with what I'm doing and what I'm saying. For example, this particular person, and I'll be vague, that way, you know, I'm not, you know, betraying any trust, but they were going through some shit, right? So it was relationship stuff, a type of relationship issue that affected every single aspect of their life. And, you know, I was listening to what they were saying. And the first thing I did is I reassured them that how you're feeling is 100% valid. So you feel upset, you feel wronged, you are angry, and you have a lot of emotion, and you've had this response, and it's fine. It is what it is. You can't change what has already occurred. That's logic. And as I'm talking to the person, they're like, you know what, you're right. I can't, I'm already there. I'm not. And so we started to talk about the positive thinking thing because they said, well, I just need to think positive. And I was like, well, no, let's look at it from a logical perspective. And I asked her, have you thought these thoughts already? Yes. And how often are you thinking the same thing? And she's like, well, I'm just thinking it again and again and again and again. And I was like, well, when you get around other people, are you just talking about the same things? And she's like, absolutely. I'm talking to you right now about it, just like I've been talking to other people about it. And then I give examples. Because people, that's one of the parts of knowledge are the examples from other people. So I was like, have you ever been around somebody who has a lot of surgeries and injuries? And then when they get around other people, they talk about surgeries and injuries. And then all they're doing is talking about surgeries. And then she's like, absolutely, I know that. And then I was like, okay, well, what about people who say they hate drama? People who say they hate drama, they're always in drama. They're always talking about drama. If they're talking, they're thinking, because those are the same thing. You're just thinking out loud without the buffer usually. So you're just spewing it out. That's why people say think before you speak, so that you can modify what you're saying. But it's still thinking. It's all using the same centers of the brain, essentially. That's logical. All I'm saying are logical points of deduction, reasoning, and it's very clear to that person because I'm meeting them where they're at with their particular situation using the principles. And then I made this recommendation. I was like, all right, when you see that your mind is starting to go back to this topic, remind yourself of these logical points. I don't need to think about this. I've already learned from it. It's going to be very difficult for anybody to ever do this to me again. Right now, I need to focus on moving forward. I need to focus on being there for other, you know, kids and family members and those types of things. So I recommended these logical points. The next day, they're commenting about how all that worked. Now, without a practice that we're doing, who knows how long that will continue? Because very likely the momentum of thought will come in, and unless a person continues to do this, you know, it won't last. It doesn't have that lasting effect. But the person was messaging me the next day, like, holy shit. Like as soon as I woke up, I felt sad and I started to launch, and then I saw it. I saw myself, and I'm paraphrasing because this is Ernest speak, but I saw myself going into the thoughts, and I just went back to logic. I don't need to think these thoughts. These thoughts aren't benefiting me. That's exactly what we talked about in the beginning of the practice when we first all started doing this. So I'm talking to you guys, so I'm going to include a whole lot more in that scope, of course, because you guys are much more practiced. But the basics of everything that I've said so far is absolutely applicable and deliverable to the beginner mind, especially when they're in that state of emotion and everything else, because logic will cut through emotion. When you watch Star Trek, there's a reason that the logical race of people have no emotion, because you can cut the emotion using logic. It is the way that the brain works. So I digress. Using logic from one extent to another will help the beginner mind just as much as it will help Lisa and Ida, who are more practiced minds. But the bottom line is that if we use logic, reasoning, and deduction as a part of our voice of power, it can talk us back or talk us forward to the practice. So talk us back from the emotional responses that and not necessarily trying to change the emotional response that has already happened. And I told her this. I was like, so watch it. Watch, the more you think about this, the more you talk about this, it goes from anger to hate to maybe even violence, wanting to do violent acts. That is a logical thing that a person can look at, and very likely, unless they're just a little kid and they have no world experience, they're going to be able to say, you know what? Yeah, I had this initial reaction. The more I think about the exact same thing in the exact same order, it just makes it worse. I just feel shittier and shittier and shittier. So logically, let's interrupt those thoughts with what we want to do. And it worked really well for her in that instance. Now, again, how long it's going to work, this practice only works when you do it. So if they don't continue to do that with their mind, it's not going to work long term. But that's also kind of what I recommended to everybody here in the beginning when we first start this practice, is to talk out our practice. Use our voice of power. When you do your rule of three, include the voice of power, reason, logic, deduction. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Where is your mind? Where are your points of attention? Use that talk. Later, when you're getting into the hydrostasy part of the practice, none of that shit matters anymore, because hopefully you've been practicing warrior training. And that kind of gets into what I was going to talk about with Ida, is one aspect of this practice, and I'm really going to start to connect it to some of Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda. You know, it's almost as if I am going to cite them. I'm going to use it as in-text citation. This is where I got this idea from, but it stands to logic, it stands to reason, and it stands to my experience. But the more that we do the hydrostasy practice, the more the world collapses. The structure of the world, in your experience, not the world outside, it's going to go. But these things, these structures that we have created with our mind energy, with our thoughts, with our opinions, with our habits, especially, habits really build this world view that we have. At a certain point in this practice, that will absolutely crumble. And Don Juan would call it stopping the world, when the world no longer has this grip and hold on you. So here's an example, and I'll give this example, and it can be applicable to other things and other people and other situations. And just as a disclaimer, this is not beginner stuff I'm talking about now. So we've moved along from that. One of the things is, for example, social anxiety. So before, when I first started practicing, I had a ton of social anxiety. I couldn't go out the door without thinking about what other people were thinking about. I couldn't be in social settings, couldn't be by myself, couldn't be in social settings without thinking about what other people were thinking about, labeling, judging, comparing, contrasting. And all of it came from one thing: self-importance. Now, self-importance is thinking about yourself. The only way that you can sustain self-importance is by thinking about yourself. If you think about yourself, your lens of perception becomes a mirror, not a lens. And everything that's going through it is just kind of bouncing back and forth and around. And that is your lens of self-reflection, who you think you are. It's okay. It can exist to one extent or another, but when we think about it all the time, we reinforce it. We create what Eckhart Tolle would call control dramas. Does that make sense? Because we will do whatever we need to maintain our own self-reflection. However, if you've been doing warrior training, you are redirecting any thought about yourself. Who here is really doing that? I don't need to think about myself. Any thought about myself. Now, self-care, that's different. That's an act. I'm doing my yoga. I'm doing my Tai Chi because that makes me feel better. And when I say feel, I mean spirit, body, and mind are aligned. That's a feeling. That's not self-importance. Because when I talk about self, I'm talking about how you view yourself. Self-reflection. Does that make sense, Ida? A lot of the fear that we're experiencing is directly proportional to that self-reflection. We're afraid of having that self-reflection shattered because we've created it, we've sustained it, we hold on to it, we cling to it, we view it as a form of identification. There is definitely something much quieter on the other side of that. And again, I don't mean, Ida, there should always be the biological fight or flight response. We're not trying to go from one extreme to the another where we never feel fear. If you're in a traffic accident and your car's fucking spinning, you're going to be afraid. Like you're going to have the electrochemical, physiological, hormonal response that you would call fight or flight, physical fear. Good. That should be there. If it is there, then your body is going to do things that it may not normally be able to do because intelligence is taking over. Is that okay?
Yes, well, no, recently I've had a response to, obviously my husband's got a heart condition and he had pain in his chest, and then I took a real fear deciding whether to get an ambulance this day or not. So the fear, the horrible feeling that I had to make this decision just for a moment or two was a real sickening, scary, paralyzing thing. And then I got myself together, thankfully,
Mm-hmm.
due to the practice, and made a decision. And once I made the decision, it was fine. But the great thing about doing the practice in these situations
Mm-hmm.
for me has been not being, I was slightly disappointed that I had the fear. And then I thought, really, like you just said there, it's a proper response to have fear in a life-threatening situation.
Sure.
So there was nothing wrong with having the fear, but at least I didn't go down I'm so disappointed. Why did I have this fear? I'm practicing. Why was I feeling so bad? But I was only feeling so bad momentarily. It wasn't a long, prolonged running about the house pulling my hair out feeling.
Right. And that
So it worked.
and that will continue to be the case. What you're describing is staying inside of your hydrostasy bubble. You had a fear response, but you didn't go outside of that circle. So you were able, if you go outside of the circle, you won't realize you're outside of the circle until it's too late. You're
And
already
also using that logic that you talked about just there to say to myself,
yes.
things have been fine in the past. He has a heart condition. Other people have heart conditions. They don't die of them necessarily. He could die, but using that logic to say that in general things, there is a benign feeling of wellness in the world that I can tap into here, and it doesn't have to be the worst case scenario all the time.
Yes.
Well, that's where I used to go to all the time, but I don't go there now.
Right. And my recommendation, Ida, if we were going to talk about it from the Gong perspective, any thought about yourself or others must be redirected using the rule of three, including a logical voice. Why is thinking about yourself? You already know everything that you're saying to you're not organizing ideas. Thinking these thoughts to yourself is not a form of organization so that you can communicate it to others, is it?
No, really, it's just your attachment to the
It is.
person, and I could see that it's the attachment that it's about me. It's about what if he dies? What am I going to do?
Bah,
It's about me. It's
interesting.
about me. Really,
Exactly.
at the end of the day, it's like he's in this bed now. There's an ambulance coming. He might not be in this bed tonight. This is the way my mind is going, So it does, like Donna says, it was paralyzing just for a moment, and I can see that all. Like at least I can see it. I'm not
Sure.
outside it and living in
Well,
staying in the fear place.
and that's what I call seeing. There's other aspects to seeing, but that's definitely one way that you can view how, when I say seeing, that's what I'm talking about. You're seeing larger perspective. You're seeing from inside the hydrostasy circle as opposed to outside of it. And the more that you practice, the better you'll get at modulating and staying within that hydrostasy circle. You won't get as close to the edge, is what I'm saying.
Well, this is what it means whenever you say for better or worse. This is a choice I made. I made a choice to love this man until either one of us dies. So this is my choice.
And
And
this,
I am living in that choice.
right,
And it's all part of life,
it is.
even the death part of it, if that were to be the case.
Well, statistically, the probability of you two dying together in your sleep without pain is very low. That's why people love that ending to, what's that movie? Do you remember? The book ends different than the movie. The Notebook, is that right? Where they die comfortably together as old people and they just take their last breath together and no suffering, no pain, and neither has to watch the other one, transition. That's why people love that ending. Because they're like, oh, that's just so statistically, that's not probable. Okay, we'll go watch it if you want to. But that's a logical thing. Like logically, statistically, somebody is going to transition before the other. So very likely each and every one of us who has this type of relationship dynamic is going to have to go through this. Shane is going to have to watch me transition at 110, and that's just the way it is. So the way to stop the world is to redirect any thought about yourself. And then when you really start to do this, it's like, holy shit. And you kind of just expressed it a little bit there, is like, that's all I'm doing. It's thinking about and it always leads back to myself, even if I'm thinking, and that's how the fear factor is directly proportional to the mirror of self-reflection. When we shatter that mirror, you'll be surprised how much of that fear just dissipates into the ether, because you're not attached to the construct of self as much. Now, we're not trying to go from one extreme to the other where there is no construct of self. That's bullshit. If I say, hey, Eckhart, he's going to turn around. He's still going to identify to a name. If I say, what's your favorite food? He will have a favorite food. What's your favorite memory? He will have a favorite memory. What do you hope will happen for mankind or for the human species? He may have an idea. So boom, we have future, we have past, we have likes, we have dislikes. He still has a sense of self. So he has not cessated the ego in any way, shape, or form. And I don't think anybody does, not necessarily. What we're looking for, though, is when we shatter the attachment to petty self-reflection, the fear will naturally start to dissipate. And then we're starting to dissolve one of the enemies of knowledge, because if we're not afraid, we can be more present, we can be more mindful, and we stand to learn more from the moment, even to the point where we start paying attention to, and this is getting a little bit woo-woo, so anybody who doesn't like this stuff, you can end the video now. It was nice talking. But if we'll start to get to a little bit of the hydrostasy stuff. What was I talking about? Dang it. I was making that.
Attachments to memories, attachments to things, and that even if you ask Eckhart Tolle, he'll tell you what his favorite memory, and get to the point of, and then you were saying we're going to get whoa here.
Damn it. Yeah, I broke the flow to tell people that they don't.
Nice talking to you.
Yeah. But
I was going to say
yeah,
that maybe it'll remind you that when you were saying, even if there's always some attachment to self, and I was thinking about what's my favorite memory, what's my favorite song, what's my favorite color, and I immediately started to go in to look at my mind, and then I stopped because I didn't like that searching for that, what would be my answer to that question. I didn't like the feeling of it. So I thought, you know what? My favorite color at any point is the one that I probably chose as my focus for the day, or the last one that I chose as my focus, because I had such appreciation for that color. It was my favorite at that moment. And if you ask me the question again in an hour or the next day, it'll probably be a different answer. It's the same thing with a song. It's the same thing with a food. It's the same thing with, I can't pick a favorite of anything anymore, because I used to walk through my garden and say, oh, you're my favorite, like to all my trees, you're my favorite flower, you're my favorite, you're my favorite. And I actually heard Esther saying something like that, because at the moment, if I'm really in the present moment, in that moment, that is my favorite. It's my favorite because it's where I'm focused and what I'm appreciating.
I would also say that logically, then
You were gonna,
your favorite.
were you going to say, Ernest, about stopping the world? Was it to do with that? Because you were talking about Eckhart and him still having an identity,
Yeah.
and you had been talking about Carlos
And an
Castaneda,
attachment to self.
attachment to self, and once the world stops, then your response to fear, you were saying about fear, not disappearing, but dissolving a certain amount once the attachment to self and other is, once you recognize that.
It's gone. It's so interesting how that works. The flow is interrupted to tell people. So next time I won't do that. I'll just go straight into the woo-woo and then I'll do the disclaimer afterwards. I was like the last
We
50,
all love we all love woo woo anyway. I don't know who you're talking to that
It'll
doesn't.
come out.
yeah, sometimes I don't like woo-woo. I mean, that's why I don't, because I don't view what we're
Yeah,
talking.
but you'll stop worrying about whether it sounds woo-woo or not, because
Yeah.
there's logic in all of it, and then you won't have to disclaim it all the time.
Well, the way
When
that
you say woo woo, do you mean trying to explain the unseen? Is
yeah,
that what you're talking about? Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, there is a sickening kind of, when you try to describe something, there is a kind of I feel like a kind of it's like trying to describe the divine. You can't do it.
I mean, not in any absolute way.
No,
You can
you
look
can
at
hint at it.
of it. Yeah.
Hint, hint.
Yeah. And then even the word divine, I kind of that's also not a word, because a lot of people, they have just taken religion and replaced God, the God figure, with the universe figure. And now the universe has a plan, everything, the universe brought this to me. And it's the same. You have to have faith in the universe. You could just put Jesus in place of the word universe and it's the exact same thing. And I just don't look at things like that. I
Would
don't.
sacred be a better word? I think there's something about a sacred, you see, not necessarily God, but a sacred.
Semantics.
Oh, it's just semantics, probably. It's just a word for describing, something, something that feels
To me, it's just a word that
otherworldly.
it just describes a connection with uh, something beyond the island of the practical, or at least what is recognized by the collective as part of the island of the practical. I think more and more of the things that we discuss here that we say are unexplainable are going to be a lot more commonplace and more explained. It gets watered down because it's not tangible to look at. So we can talk about our experiences, but like you said before, Ida, it's really, we're having our own individual experience in the world. There may be commonalities between us, and what it feels like, and maybe we're talking about the same thing, and maybe we're agreeing on something, but we'll never really know because it's our own personal understanding of some kind of connection we're making with the totality of our individual experience through our lens at this moment in time. So, trying to describe what's common amongst all of us is hard to describe with the language we have right now. That's why it's expressed in art, music, poetry. That's why
Like
it
watching the
resonates.
hawk yesterday with the rabbit, there were no words. Just watching, just watching.
Yeah, so many things at play at once.
I'll backtrack to one of the previous notes that I had, but one of the things that we were talking about was related to what I call when intention, will, desire, for most people, because of thought, it's thought that drives these things away from one another. And they should be overlapping. There should be desire is a human thing. It's kind of a form of, we could also look at desire as a result of the evolution of consciousness, because I look at desire a little bit differently than an intelligent thing. So we want water, that's just our body's intelligence. So when you're thirsty, that is your body's intelligence. I don't really look at that as Maslow's hierarchy of needs and desire. The way that I use the word desire is more of a conceptual thing. It goes outside of the body's intelligence to a certain extent. So I don't look at an atom as having desire. I look at an atom as having intelligence. Does that make sense? And the intelligence and the intention and the will are all overlapping. It's just one thing. That's how the universe expresses itself. It doesn't express itself in division. The universe itself expresses itself in all of these things all at once. Everywhere, everything, all at once. Does that make sense? That's a little bit tricky to conceptualize, but I think I just did it. So what we're looking for here, though, is what I call the accumulation of personal power. And actually, no, it's not really we could use the word accumulation just in talking about it, but that's not what's happening. We don't have a bowl and we're just filling it up and I have more than you. That's not how it is. It has to do with getting out of your own way. And that's a psychological thing. That's not just a fancy catchphrase. We get out of our own way and we feel peace. That's the definition for me for inner peace, is a mind that is not at war with itself. When we get into the later phases of hydrostasy, we are no longer bored or otherwise at odds with the present moment. You are out of the way. When you get out of the way, everything begins to flow, and the desire, the intention, and the will start to overlap. We call that optimal human experience, in buzzy catchwords now, flow state. When the intention and the will are not discernibly different. We only have different words for these two things, or these three things really, because of the way that the human mind is engaging with their experience. So every time that we have a desire that aligns to the intention, that aligns to the will, and that triangle is complete, energy flows, and we are able to utilize this personal power more and more, easier and easier. And it is a limitless thing. So one of the reasons that there's certain aspects to Don Juan I can't talk about. I've never seen some of the things that Don Juan describes. I've never done some of the things that he describes. However, there's a lot of things that I just cannot refute. It is logical, it is reasonable, I see it, I feel it, and I know that this is an accurate description for what I want to also share, how I want to share it. So a lot like you were saying with the religions, Ida, take what you want to take, and then I personally put everything else on the island of maybe. It's the island of possibility. I don't know. I find that helps me remain a critical thinker, because I put it on the island of maybe more information will present itself, maybe knowledge will increase. But it's the personal power that will help stop the world. They go hand in hand, because we're assuming that we're doing this practice. We're assuming that we're redirecting. Every single time that you redirect a petty thought about yourself, petty self-indulgence, you are accumulating personal power, intention, and will. The more you entertain petty self-indulgence, you're very likely borderline leaking power. What is self-indulgence? You're complaining about yourself, thinking about what you want and what you think you need. That's when I talk about the lens of perception clearing, and then now there's no discernible difference between intelligence and desire. Our desires are fundamentally intelligent. Balance, eating well, sleeping well, doing things that are beneficial for our life experience. Does that mean you can't go out and party like it's 1999? Sure you can. But if you start to do that to an extent that it takes you out of your hydrostasy bubble, that's not logical. That doesn't make any sense. Does that make sense, Ida? So I'm kind of setting the stage for what that stopping the world looks like and how it feels. So I was giving the example of when I was walking around, all this social anxiety, and then I started to emphasize other things, and it was still there though. I needed to emphasize other things, or I would go back to the social anxiety, wondering what other people are thinking, how do I look to them, all that stuff. So it was still there. I was still working with it. It wasn't strong anymore though. But the reason I needed to emphasize certain things was because that anxiety was still there. That means that the fear was still there, that fear factor still existed. Again, not declaring war on it, not trying to change it. I see it. That's the seeing part of it. I feel it. I know when it's there, and that's okay. The closer we get to the accumulation of personal power to the point where we stop the world, that will shatter. And my points of emphasis will no longer be so that I don't have the social anxiety, because the social anxiety is gone. It doesn't exist. I never need to think about it again. Does that make sense? That's just like when Long would say, no, you haven't let shit go. You're still thinking about it. You're still talking about it. So if I'm using my points of attention to counterbalance from social anxiety, that means the fear is still there. And that's okay, right? As long as I'm inside my hydrostasy bubble, then I still have cognitive attention. I still have behavioral attention. I'm fine. I'm surfing, and that's okay. There does come a point where all of that shatters, and that's called stopping the world. When all of that is gone and we no longer need any of that self-reflection anymore. That's one of the final things that will go from our lens of perception is petty self-reflection. It takes so much of our cognition and energy and personal power to maintain that self-reflection of who we think we are. And we begin to cling and attach to it to the nth degree. And the world is so far away from what I'm talking about right now, it's not even funny. 99.9% of the people I have ever met are totally attached to petty self-reflection. Identification to these individual aspects of self is who we really are, rather than just aspects that are benign, not plus, not minus, not good, not bad, they just are. So one of the things that we're looking to do, especially when we start to get to hunting power, and I was going to kind of mention this as well, I would only recommend hunting power deep into the practice as we start to get towards the end. But that will be setting up intention and will according to your desire. And I recommend, this is one of the ways that we do it, and this will be in the Gong, because this is how you do it. I'm telling you what you should do. When you come up against a habit, a behavior, a thought, things that you know are taking you away from your hydrostasy center, they are redirected using that triangle. What is my desire? Is it intelligent? And you can identify intelligence using logic again, because intelligence and logic go hand in hand. Now, I'm not saying that our logic and our reason are used to put the world inside of a box. You can never do that. It's impossible. It's stupid to even want to, that's not logical. It's logically not logical. The universe is infinite. That's the way we talk about things. You can't put that inside of a box of language, of words. If your understanding is completely information based, you will never experience some of the things that I'm prepared to talk about in hydrostasy. Does that make sense? So the accumulation of personal power gets us closer to the point where we can shatter this petty self-reflection that is by default what leads to the othering. There will be no othering if there is no petty self-reflection. Does that make sense? And then with that, the aspects of, and I'll show this again just for fun, the aspects of these two triangles, I'll save this. I have to remember to save the whiteboards. It doesn't do it automatically. Eventually, and since I can't really draw the triangles getting smaller and smaller and smaller, I put a circle around it. When the circle is around it, then we just assume that these are all balanced with one another and there's no discernible difference between them. Does that make sense? That's where the circle comes into play. And that's when it's basically just personal power at that point, which I view as like a force in the universe.
It's like electrons spinning around the atom,
What is?
the circle.
Sure.
Because it's not stagnant. It's moving.
Oh, it's all moving. Yeah. So intelligence, knowledge, and wisdom is one triangle. And then we have desire. This is kind of how they come together. And you'll start to see the relationship between your intelligence and your desire, your knowledge and your intention, your power of will and your wisdom. Remember, wisdom is acting on it. So if you've remembered and you've acted on it, then you've used your will. You set your intention based on your information, your personal experience, and the experience of others. And this little point in the center is personal power. And it can start to fuel all of that. It's like it's one fuels the other fuels the one. It's kind of like when you look at the term ignition with fusion energy. That's why they say self-sustaining, because it will continue to create its own energy. So eventually, when we practice enough, and this is well in, and I'm sorry, my circle, my triangles aren't perfect, therefore my circle won't be perfect. But when I put this circle around it, that means that there is no discernible oh, where did my other word go? I had the word desire here, didn't I? When this circle is in place, that means we had the personal power necessary to bring these all together. It will look like an elegant ebb and flow state, because I can't just say flow state anymore. So it's an elegant ebb and flow state where intelligence overlaps desire, wisdom overlaps will, knowledge overlaps intention, and in the center is personal power. And then eventually that center becomes the whole thing. And that's hydrostasy as well. And at that point, the world will stop. The petty self-reflection will shatter, and we will see the infinite inside the finite inside the infinite, the plus inside the minus inside the plus. And then you'll really understand why the yin-yang symbol has the little white dot inside of the black and the black dot inside of the white. A lot of people don't understand why that's there. They'll say it, this is the yin inside of the, but they don't really understand what they're saying. Does that make sense, Ida?
Could you just say that last wee bit about the dot inside the white bit?
So when you look at a yin yang, have you ever noticed that there is two little circles inside the bigger circle?
Yep.
Yeah. So that is the idea that it's always changing into the other into the one. There's no discernible difference anymore between the two.
Yes, black is white and white is black.
Ebb and flow is always happening, but in balance.
Right. And when this happens, the self-reflection shatters, the world loses its heaviness, and we enter a state of being that I call dream walking. Look at, so this will be, I guess, a final example because we're an hour and 40 minutes in. So we could kind of look at it. What was I going to say again?
You were saying about the self-reflection shatters. I wanted to, yes, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, so when we talk about problems, when we talk about the things that occupy our mind, how many of those things are physical and in your island of the practical, and how many are in the island of infinity? The island of infinity is a little bit abstract. Remember, it's very difficult to talk about. It's energy. It goes beyond thought. There's no words that have been created to describe everything in infinity. That's stupid. That makes no sense. So the island of infinity is the island of infinity for a reason. So the island of the finite, well, that's the island of the practical. How many of your thoughts, how many of your concerns, how many of your goals, hopes, dreams, aspirations are in the island of the finite? Now, when you shatter your petty self-reflection, when you shatter this sense of I'm constantly looking at myself and then projecting myself onto other, all of that will go away. And before you know it, you'll be able to see some things that you could, this will be determined by each person's character, each person's totality of their experience so far. But when this petty self-reflection thing that we do, the fear will start to dissipate because we're no longer sustaining it. We're no longer creating this attachment to the construct of self. When that goes away, goes away to a certain extent, of course, and Donna talks about degrees. I'm talking about it shattering completely at a certain point. It's kind of a definable thing that you can feel. It's gone now. It doesn't exist anymore. All of a sudden, there can become goals, desires that are in the island of infinity. And it's more of an abstract desire. I'll talk about that in a complete class like that. Well, that discussion right there would have to happen in an entire hour and 20 minutes or hour and 40 minutes.
Yes, and when I have noticed that the Ada that is arising in me, I like her.
Well, good. That's
You
nice.
know, you know what I mean? That petty self thing is diminishing,
Good.
and the replacement is like warm and nice. You know, like I can't, well, obviously I can't really describe that, but there is a feeling of yeah, this is nice. There's no not no, but there's much less beating myself up.
Right.
So
Look at it.
the less beat up person is becoming warm and natural and nice.
Right. Look at it this way. So this is kind of a new circle. The first circle that I will create is petty self-reflection, right? Now, by doing the practice, petty self-reflection gets a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller, and then it starts to transform into something else. And we can only talk a little bit about what this something else is. But what this is will be felt, because this, and I'll put petty self-reflection, this is easy to describe. Like, we can describe this all day. And there's a reason for that, because this is all being sustained with what? What sustains this? What creates this? There's only one right answer.
Thoughts.
Thoughts.
Just thoughts.
Absolutely. Without thoughts, without verbal word-based cognition, we wouldn't be able to create, to the extent that we do, this petty self-reflection. And by that, I don't mean survival instinct, because animals have survival instinct. That's not petty self-reflection.
They're not thinking about it.
They're not thinking about it. They're not creating a construct of self. Their body is just in fight or flight, and it's about survival, because that's intelligent. In order to evolve and in order to change over time, you have to survive. If you die, you don't, if your physical body transitions, that physical body mind will not change over time. It can't. It's gone. It's decomposing. Does
I
that
mean,
make sense?
the hawk wasn't thinking about how beautiful its feathers were.
I don't know.
It
I
was
don't know
just
what the
eating.
hawk was thinking about. But so I wouldn't view the hawk looking at beauty, because the word beauty for me, the way that I talk about that, is an aspect of the evolution of consciousness, because there's no reason to find anything beautiful. But you're right. When you start to look at yourself as beautiful, then there is an ugly. And that's in the Tao Te Ching. The moment you create beauty, you also create ugliness. That's in the scope of petty self-reflection. As a feeling, no. There's no opposite to it. So we're trying to describe a feeling. We say beauty. That's just a word that we're using to describe this feeling of connection that we've made. I actually think it's an erroneous word, but that's okay. We can go with it rather than against it, because we have this language to use. So now what I'm describing, and again, this will all be relative to personal power. The personal power necessary to not sustain those particular thoughts, that creates the petty self-reflection. So these circles are the practice. The reason that these circles are reducing is due to the practice. And then we stop the world. We go through what we call the event horizon. I would put that as like the point in between these two. I would also say that the more personal power you have, the more it's flowing through you, the more you can begin to describe things that you were previously unable to describe. So there's a reason that I can describe this all to you, and there's a reason that I will continue to be able to in new ways, because I have the personal power necessary to bring all of this together, specifically the knowledge with the intention, with the will, the wisdom, the desire, and the intelligence. But this is what we would call the event horizon. Oh, wait. I don't know why I made the triangle that way. Or this, so this is the event horizon. I'm going to take away this one because I don't even know why I put that there. Probably because I was talking. And then this one would be what we could call stopping the world. And it's only at this point, I wish Mike was here, because Mike was one of the ones who really was confused about what I meant by this. But at some point in this, we will create what I call otherwise you really throw the guy off at Trader Joe's because you didn't use any deliberate folly, and you cut straight to the core of his petty self-importance, and it shocked the shit out of him and he was offended. And I was like, damn, I didn't really mean to do that. That was not my intention, but I should have remembered my deliberate folly. No, yes, I love New Year's. Yeah, I can't wait to make my New Year's resolution. I know that's lying, so I wouldn't do that either. I would come up with something that's neutral that kind of just weasels me out of the conversation. This map is kind of all over the place, but so this big circle is the petty self-reflection of most people. Look at how proportional this is. What is the distance from this circle to this circle? Oh, it's quite large. Every now and then we can have an event that brushes us with some of these beginning things. This circle requires momentum. This we don't brush against this circle. This circle we don't brush against. We have to have momentum. And the reason you can't have a brush with this particular circle is because it requires momentum. Momentum and a brush implies that we just kind of jumped. We shook our lens of perception for whatever reason. So maybe you get a winning lottery ticket or something like that, and it shatters everything for a moment because your electrochemical, physiological, hormonal response altered your lens of perception. And then all of a sudden we had a moment of clarity and we awakened. That was our awakening date. I'm putting that in air quotes because I view that as just mumbo jumbo. I'm not really interested in all that.
Don't go into mumbo jumbo, where you're gonna lose your train of thought.
Yeah. Does all that make sense? All of that, all of the different triangles and circles and everything I just described? One thing that I would mention is that anybody who wants to share things with other people, some of these concepts, it is directly proportional to personal power. The more that you have that flow, and then personal power, we could look at it this way, and I'll save this whiteboard as well. Sometimes when we use the word power, it gets very confusing, and we start to look at it in the way that the world uses the word. The way the world uses the word implies subject and object. Control.
You couldn't have talked about hunting power or personal power until the leaking power was resolved.
Absolutely. No, you can't do that. That you won't have the energy necessary.
You don't even know what it is until you experience leaking
Right.
power, and then you watch yourself do it, stop yourself from point yourself away from it, find yourself in it, point yourself away from it. That takes momentum before you can even realize what hunting power is.
Right. Well, you can understand hunting power, but you won't be able to do it. You won't be able to do it as a practice because there will be too much petty self-reflection.
Then there's no real understanding until you have personal experience.
Right. So again, and I've drawn this diagram before. And in Gong, I will show you what to do with your mind to help accumulate personal power. Specific
I
techniques.
must say,
Yes.
sorry, I'm looking forward to you telling us what to do, me in particular, because
I
it's
was
like,
really excited about it too. I was about to interrupt and
yeah,
say the same.
it's like you put the radio on and the DJ plays the songs and you don't have to pick your own playlist. Isn't that great sometimes when you don't have to choose the
Sometimes.
music? Just sometimes. Sometimes you want to.
It also is exciting to develop your own bag of tricks and your own things and then get creative from them. But you know what? You need the paints first. I don't really want to mix my own paints. So Ernest already did that. So just give me the paints and then tell me what to do with them and then I'll go from there.
So in some ways we could look at this in the like the Qigong Tai Chi point of view where we have heaven. I don't really prefer some of these terms because of their religious connotations. But when you hear Tai Chi people talk about this, this is kind of what we're talking about. So infinite, finite, the human being as a conduit. You could look at the human being as, and this is just a way of talking about it. Heaven forbid we start, going to the way that people talk about things on the internet, and now all of a sudden we're a magnet. And it's like, it's like when people talk about magnets, opposites don't, the likeness pushes away. Opposites attract with magnetism, and that's not what Esther's talking about. Esther's talking about likeness comes together. Like when you want something, what you want is now made available, and there can be a likeness and a connection between the two likenesses, and it feels like things are coming to you. And then somebody uses the word magnetism, and now all of a sudden we're magnets. And it's like, I don't want to break to them how magnetism actually works, because those are opposites attracting. And then allowing is a tough thing because that word is often viewed as passivity. So again, it's just the words we're using and how we're using it. That's why I like alignment better than allowing, because this is alignment. You've aligned infinite, you've aligned finite through the human. And when you do that, so we'll say, I'll say human battery. So we're kind of like a battery. We could look at this as, and again, these are arbitrary distinctions. These aren't literal distinctions, but we could say positive charge. And we could say that this is the negative charge. We could do this all day, honestly, with these opposites. So we'll stop there. I won't do more opposites, but you get the idea. Now, with our practice, what we do is instead of, I drew a perfect shape here, right? That's not what the human being's structure doesn't quite look like that. And this won't really help me draw an accurate description, but it's like this weird crooked shape instead of a perfect shape. Does that make sense? And by perfect, I mean geometrically even. So this is, we could say, also the lens of perception. Now, when the lens of perception is geometrically sound, it's geometrically even, it flows. Everything flows really well. When the lens of perception is this thing, what is coming through is getting plugged up, it's barely trickling out, and it's all messed up. Is this making sense? So with our practice, we are straightening this out physically, psychologically, and energetically. So mind, body, and spirit, those three things, we connect them. Oh, we could put that here. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, yeah, we could go on and on. Physical, non-physical. The mind is in between. It's physical and non-physical. But so is the body. Okay, so personal power will feel like what is coming in is smoothly, elegantly also going out. And the more that this happens, the more that our container fills with laminar flow, smooth, flowing energy. And that feels like personal power, like you can do anything. This does not feel like personal power over here. And I will say this is the common.
Seeing this, it just reminds me that leaking power stops the continuity of anything.
It does. It absolutely stops the continuity of everything. You're right. Because when you're leaking power, what is that? You're focusing on a petty sense of self. Poor me. And that's the worst, is poor me. Now
You've
you.
introduced resistance, which is all those bumps in the cylinder.
Mhm. Resistance is another one I don't use because resistance can sometimes be connotated as like pushing away, like actively
Yeah.
pushing against. And you don't have to actively push against anything. You can just habitually plug up the flow.
Yeah, there's resistance in my drain right now, and I have to call the plumber. So
Yeah.
I see it as resistance. It works for me.
Hmm. I would say though that in the example of your drain, there's just a clog. Resistance would mean that there's something inside of your drain that's resisting the water's flow. And I wouldn't say that the clog is actively resisting anything. It's just there. It's just plugging up the flow. Resisting is a word that's used often in the law of attraction.
It's disturbing the lens of perception.
Another way to look at resistance is what you resist will persist because you're giving it the energy necessary to push away. So these are just reasons why I don't use the word. It has too much baggage. Yeah, like God. Way too much baggage, not using that word. And you guys you can say whatever you want to say, but yeah. So what does a practice look like that is in that smooth energy flow? It will include all four directions of attention, most likely all four directions of attention simultaneously all throughout the day. As I pointed out yesterday to somebody I was talking to, I was aware of very nearly every single breath that I took. I've been stringing that together for weeks now, months. There are times I forget. I remember playing, or I was watching a football game. Sometimes it happens with sports. It happens when I get excited sometimes. I'll get excited. I still won't go away from my body. So I still haven't lost all my points of attention, but I'll lose breath and imagination usually pretty quick when I get too excited because I've gone outside of the hydrostasy circle. And and that's fine. It's okay. I'm not like, oh my God, I was excited. I need to, say 100 Hail Marys, right? That's not necessary. But I see it because of I didn't lose all four directions of my attention. But I don't think about myself all the time. So I don't have the same attachments. I'm not clinging. I'm accumulating personal power. And that will lead to one of the things that the human being struggles with the most. So the more that we can accumulate personal power, whoops, why does it do that? I can't see it over there. So hopefully it's phone. And that's it. So ultimately, because we're accumulating the personal power can be felt. The more that we feel it, the more we can put our attention on it, the more that it grows, the more that we can utilize it, and the more we can tap into universal intelligence. The more that we tap into universal intelligence, that will begin to guide our desires. And then before you know it, behavioral change will become a desirable thing, as opposed to, I need to quit eating so much sugar because it's making me fat. That's petty self-reflection. You're trying to stop a behavior because of petty self-reflection. There's no personal power there. Sure, you can force yourself, but I would actually say that you're wasting vital life energy. And that, yeah, you quit eating the sugar, but now look at you, you have 99 other problems. So when we get to this point of accumulating personal energy, there will come a time where you're about to reach for that third piece of cake and you're like, it doesn't feel good. I don't want to do that. You know, maybe the way that we look at sex, the way that we look at entertainment, the way that we look at biology, the way that we look at entertainment, the way that we look at the destroyers will start to change because it will be more in alignment to fundamental intelligence. And that may be hard to describe to other people, but it will influence your life experience. And I could go into all of the behavioral changes that have occurred for me over the last 2 years. It is all reflective of the destroyers. And so I'll stop the recording.